I just brought out the worst in you as far as
weird being honored for the worst day of your life.
Tape of this worst singer in the world woman, and
it's about the worst opera singer in the world, but
the worst criminals you could imagine.
What would you do with $1 million? It's not the worst idea.
Walter, do you party?
They're bad guys. Worst of the worst.
So why did I tackle this?
Worst. The whole film is acapella. Really don't like Harry Potter.
Worst lover I ever had in my life.
What?
I'm serious.
Worst nightmare.
Go, go! Got the Lambo in the back.
Get me!
No!
What?
No!
What were you doing?
What am I doing? I care about this kid.
This is the worst transcript I have.
I've no hunger, I've no thirst. Live the best and seen the worst. But
A billionaire? The worst thing in the world you can get is a little
Oh.
You're the worst driver I've ever seen in my life. Any place, the worst. Europe, the United, any place. Asia.
Sorry, Henry. This could be the worst disaster NASA's ever experienced.
At its worst, it's just a city without any...
And worst of all, nobody believes me.
I believe you, baby.
But you're gonna let it be the worst. Oh!
What's the worst thing that could happen if you enter this company?
It makes me think of the worst thing I can imagine. It makes me think of the worst thing I can imagine.
The worst nightmare.
It's not just about the look. It's
Scott, you're the worst.
hey Davesies, the client wants.
I'm not here.
What's the worst that can happen, huh? It's a doll. What's the worst that can happen, huh?
Hey, that's the worst case, but you know.
You just officially had the worst date ever.
It's the best story you've ever done, or the worst story. And this is it.
after you catch the worst boo of your life. Davey, wake up. Is that the worst nightmare?
The worst end.
Those mob fools want you gone so they can get back.
Only eats dough.
Oh my God!
Oh, hell, the god of lies! Damn right. The worst of the worst. Don't love that one. The douchiest of all bad.
Yeah, well, you really are your own worst critic. I'm sure it's a...
Baseball ain't for whips!
Ooh.
This thing rolls chunks. We have the worst team in the world.
Margaret.
I hate you, Henry!
Henry?
I'm the worst teacher in the whole wide world.
Howard, you really are the worst.
Worst time to meet somebody, a potential love interest, but that's
Guy you'll ever meet, and also the worst guy you'll ever meet, and the story behind one of the worst films of all time called
The worst word that you can say, so just use the word okay.
With like, just like the worst snarl. I would use
Own worst enemy.
I think they've seen the worst of it, but there's 100-foot
complete stop.
worst comes to worst, you stay down here.
The worst thing ever to hit Franklin. Boys are the worst thing ever to hit Franklin.
Coming in off the golf, worst of it around midnight.
Jim. Worst. It allowed for that. It allowed for...
In a creative field, but the worst thing that can happen is...
You don't know what you're doing. They bring in the worst of the worst. The authorities have actually shut the game down.
I could safely put my hand up my arse and say that is the worst record I've heard this century. Oh.
So what is the answer?
You have to use it or you lose it.
What's the worst thing you've ever done?
It's like the worst thing that ever happened.
What? Worst comes to worst, he kicks me out the door.
Include us.
Mr. Grote is the worst. He haunts those my
Worst of circumstances.
He left you this state.
Sam comes back to LA in the worst of circumstances.
Worst moments, and the bigger the crisis, sometimes I know.
This man, make the first one. See, make a miss like that.
My worst is
I was there, I saw it.
you misunderstood.
This is
Miss Hawkins. One of the worst things that's ever happened here.
Worst of the worst.
I'm at the very worst one.
On March 3rd.
Today will not suck.
Everything he can do except the worst things, and when it comes, he has to do the worst. It's you know, he looks like his character is sort of having the worst week of all.
Huh? What do you want? You're the worst pickpocket I've...
This is one of your worst depressions.
Am I alone in this mess?
We can make the best of the worst of it.
Even if we're really bad, you're not the worst.
Worst place on earth.
The worst of the worst.
He wasn't backing down.
Spits in my face. The worst is everybody south of Fort Lauderdale.
Not the worst.
Listen, get some class.
There. These woods bring out the worst in people.
Worst enemy, but I think I would probably do the same.
I'm worried because it's the worst thing if your parents start.
Worst circumstances for a baby ever. It's like they're in the mountain.
Own worst enemy.
I told you this is a bad idea.
Shut up. How am I?
Of traitors. Of this one. Worst of all, my own brother who's trying to...
The worst of James Bond.
As I grew older,
It's the worst of times. Worst of times. Full of wonderful people.
You're the worst teacher I've ever had.
Summer that
This must be the worst house in Moldova.
Retriever. So I'm
adorable.
Like the worst casting.
I would say,
what's the worst that can happen?
Survive the worst days. Ain't no one can teach you how to take life of another.
That's the signal. Go, 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 go! Let's go freaking get here!
What's the worst that can happen?
You're breaking bread with the worst Irish mobster in...
Was one of the worst things I've ever heard.
FBI to be so corrupt. It's the worst informant scam.
Worst thing that could happen to him. Not being in jail.
Worst possible way.
Working man, eh? 40 years from now, you're gonna...
Oh, because he's the worst photographer. Okay, good.
It went beyond all worst fears, all worst nightmares.
I'm sorry, pal. Gotta be about the worst birthday ever. Please don't be.
Guy is Mr. Crook.
George Harold!
He's the worst principal in the world.
Worst of the parks, everyone the worst of the ride operators, the dancing panda, the rag...
New fully animated film, Smurfs are one big family of